with a new part, that is ancient India. So this is going to be the first class of ancient India. But before I start with the ancient India, there are some basic things that we have to discuss. So I'll just start with those discussions, and then of course I'll come to the various other aspects which are necessary for ancient India. So when it comes to ancient India, right, when it comes to ancient India, there's a very regular question that I used to always ask. Why should we study ancient India? क्यों पढ़ना चाहिए? नहीं पढ़ेंगे तो क्या हो जाएगा? What is the purpose of reading this ancient India? छोड़ देते हैं? We can skip this or not? नहीं. He's saying that we can't skip it. What about you? नहीं, पढ़ना है. क्या देते? छोड़ देते चलेगा यार, चलेगा. He is okay with that. पंकज, छोड़ दे या चल, पढ़ना है, पढ़ना पड़ेगा. क्यों पढ़ना पड़ेगा? That's the question. Why should we study ancient India? That's a simple question that I have been asking to you. It's a very simple answer here for that question. We have to study ancient India. The reason that while writing UPSC exam, we need marks. That's it. This is a very basic thing that I have been telling you. But then this is the most important question. Why? Because if you have to really understand ancient India with respect to this UPSC, in that case you have to understand this ancient India. And what is the purpose? As I have already told you, that we need to get marks. Normally what happens, I have noticed this, that people are taking it lightly, and in fact they are making the plannings in this way, that if you are leaving this ancient ancient part, what is going to happen? We have to just attempt one question from ancient India, and that's how we are going to write the paper. But then what I believe, that ancient India is the most important part, and without understanding this ancient India, frankly speaking, actually you are not going to perform very well in the paper, because it's not about only, it is one section of history, but then you have to understand that this is the foundation phase of Indian history, and that's the reason because of what, the understanding of ancient India is even going to help you for the understanding of rest of the parts. What happens normally, sometimes you start reading history from the middle. Sometimes people are reading it from medieval, people are reading it from the modern India, and why they believe ki, okay, these are just the segments, but frankly speaking these are not just the segment, it is the foundation of Indian history, and that's why you have to have a very good idea of ancient India. This is even going to make rest of the parts very good, and that's the reason because of what we should have a very good understanding of ancient India. But then yes, while reading this ancient India, nobody is here to become actually historian. Anybody who is really trying to become historian? And if you'd be really trying to become historian, you must not be here. That is also for sure. Right? So basically, we have to study this ancient India in such a way that the questions which are being asked in in UPSC exam, you can answer them, answer them beautifully. But before I come to that, I come to basically the syllabus and other things, the moment it comes to ancient India, or the moment it comes to basically Indian history, there are certain basic questions. Indian history. There are certain basic questions, and we have to understand it with respect to those basic questions of ancient Indian history, or let's say Indian history, right? So when it comes to history, right, history is a much more vast subject in terms of syllabus and many other things, right? And how to reduce this vastness, that also will be understand, you'll be able to understand it from here. So when it comes to Indian history, right, when it comes to Indian history, what are the important dimensions that you should understand for this Indian history, and that can help you to understand even the ancient Indian history in a better way. So the moment you talk about history, what are the important dimensions that you should keep in mind? Whenever it comes to history, what are the important dimensions that you have to understand? Okay, we'll focus more on ancient India. आप बताइए कि when it comes to ancient India, what are the specific things that you need to keep in mind while reading ancient India? Because if you are still believing that the kind of pattern that we had followed for understanding ancient Indian history like 10 years back, or even I'll say 5 years back, the same idea is not going to work here, and that's why we need to change our approach to understand ancient Indian history, and this is what I'm going to discuss in this particular session. So when it comes to history, specifically the ancient Indian history, like history, let's write ancient only. What are the important things that must be kept in mind? So the first thing that is very important here, that should be kept in mind here, the first thing that we have to keep in mind, that when it comes to ancient India, what is the time period that we have been studying in this particular period for ancient? What is the period that we have been covering? Stone Age to 3rd century BC, right? Okay, fine. Stone Age to 3rd century CE. What about the Gupta period? Are you not studying it in the ancient? पढ़ते हैं ना ancient? ठीक है, इसको हम लेते हैं roughly I am writing 10th century CE. That is the period that we have been covering. Now this is very important thing that I am trying to discuss over here. This is the time frame that you have been covering. Now how do you understand? How should you understand this ancient India? That's very important. The moment you have been talking about this, right, this particular time frame, there is a particular meaning or specific meaning. Now coming to the next question, right? Apart from this, right, apart from this, what is the next thing that you should keep in mind? That when it comes to the ancient Indian history, it is the formative phase of Indian society. When I am saying society, it means that I am talking about polity, I am talking about economy, every aspect, right? So society does not mean that I am simply talking about some of the basic institutions of the society. Rather, I am trying to make you understand about all the aspects of society. So this is the very important aspect. Now what is this formative phase? Could you get it? What is this formative phase? Could you get the right meaning of this formative phase? The moment you talk about Indian society, you should understand that there was a beginning, right? Whereas this much, so you all this information you all must be having, that when it comes to beginning of any society, the beginning was from the prehistoric times. When it is the prehistoric times, so you know about the evolution. Though we are not supposed to read much about this evolution, but yet the beginning is there from the evolution, and from that particular point you can find the establishment of various institutions, right? When I am saying about the institutions, so what are the institutions I have been talking about? What are the institutions that I have been talking about? First, I can say political institution. Then I can talk about, let's say, economic institution. Then it comes to religious institution, and then social, and finally you can say cultural institutions. I am trying to discuss about all these various institutions which got formed during which period? Ancient India. Let's say if you talk about the political institution, now what sort of political institution I am trying to discuss about here? So basically when human beings started, when the societies are getting formed, at that point of time there was no concept of state, there was no concept of kingship, there was no concept of administration and so on. So gradually all these institutions are getting formed, right? And when did it happen? It happened in the ancient India. Let's say if I'll be asking this question to you, that when do you find the formation of state? That happened in ancient times, right? So when you go to the medieval period, of course the state continues, maybe certain natures certain features are also changing, but then more or less I can talk about one institution, one basic structure of the institution which got established forever. And what was that? There used to be a king, right? There used to be some ministers and maybe army and some other things. That's the reason because of what I have been calling it the formative phase, because the political institution got institutions they started from zero, and by the the Guptas I must say, you are finding that some political institution got fully established, and that's why I told you that this is the formative phase. Then it is about the economic structure. So when it comes to economic structure, again you should understand that when we started, like when we converted into, let's say, Homo sapiens, we became Homo sapiens. Like before that, there was no sort of economy, though, like there was one economy that's called as hunting and gathering economy. But then you do know that from that particular, like stage, we have come forward, and in fact, when we covered this journey, again ancient does play a very important role, because some of the important institutions got established during which period? During this period only. So when it comes to economy, like we can talk about basically, like different kind of economy. We can talk about the agrarian economy, we can talk about, let's say, secondary economy, okay? We can talk about urbanization, and so on. So there are various like economic institutions in fact, like which got established during this particular period, and that's how I'm saying that yes, there were so many like important developments in this particular line. Now moving to the next one is religion. I think this is one dimension you all must be understanding very, very, very beautifully right now. Religion does play a very important role in society. But then, of course, it is true that when we started, like as a society, at that point of time, there was no as such religion. So religion is also getting formalized over the period. And if I'll ask this question that when did it happen? So again, you'll answer like that it happened in the ancient times only. So in the religion also, you'll find various institutions, and specifically, I would like to talk about two different institutions. One in terms of practice, one in terms of philosophy. राइट सो प्रैक्टिसेस पहले क्या होती थी कि पहले बहुत बेसिक प्रैक्टिसेस होती थी, एंड वो बहुत थियोरेटिकल नहीं है, बट ग्रेजुअली क्या हो रहा है कि उन प्रैक्टिसेस को थ्योरीज के साथ क्लब करके हम उसको प्रॉपर रिलीजन के फॉर्म में लेके आ रहे हैं. और ये कब हुआ? ये एंशिएंट टाइम में हुआ. इसीलिए मैं कह रहा हूँ कि इस पर्टिकुलर पीरियड में रिलीजियस इंस्टीट्यूशंस भी स्टैब्लिश हो रहे हैं, एंड दैट वी हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड. And then it comes to like society. I think that when it comes to social institutions, it's not very tough for you to understand, as you do understand about various social institutions, what are being followed by us, being practiced by us, even in the recent times, like these got ultimately established in which period? They got established in the ancient times, right? So when it comes to the social institutions, so I think every sort of thing that you see around you ultimately got established in which period? Ancient period, right? So either you got either you say about, let's say, family, this is one institution got established in the ancient times. Then we can talk about varna, we can talk about caste, we can talk about gotra, and there were many other things. Gender is also a very important aspect of this. So that's how we can say various social institutions also got established, and in fact, as I'm telling you again and again, that these are the institutions which are still continuing with us, and that's the reason because of what I have been calling it the formative phase, right? And finally, it comes to the cultural dimension. So when it comes to the cultural dimensions, right, so here you should understand one important thing, that as far as the culture is concerned, right, so it does include various things. Culture is a much more larger term, and since it is a much more larger term, and that's the reason because of what architecture, painting, right, dance, music, there were so many things which are coming from culture. So that's the reason because of what I call this particular period as the formative phase of Indian history, and this is what you have to keep in mind, that while reading this ancient India, understand it with this particular perspective, that all these institutions are getting formed here. Okay, fine. Now moving to the third important aspect, and now the third important aspect is somehow more important for us. And now what is that? What is this third important aspect? Is basically about the historiography. Now this is the third important aspect, that's the historiography, and it is very important for you. You have to understand it. Now when it comes to historiography, I won't go into the basics, because maybe I believe that you all must have covered the basics. The moment I say historiography, so you should understand, like you must be knowing that Indian historiography does include the nationalist, right, first imperial historiography, then the nationalist historiography, then the Marxist historiography, and then like subaltern historiography. These are some basic information. How many of you are having this information? Okay, these are the schools of history writing. So just 2-3 fellows. Okay, fine. So you guys are having some idea. So have you heard of these kind of things before? Like those, you people are having some idea. Some idea you guys are having, right? So this thing you have already heard. Okay. Okay. Now I would like to discuss a very different dimension of this historiography, so that you have to follow very closely. Now here I would like to give some time to make you understand about this historiography that can help you to understand the whole ancient India. So when it comes to historiography, right, of ancient India. Precisely, I am trying to discuss about the ancient Indian historiography, and that's why I will focus more on that part. Let's talk about this only. Okay, fine. So when it comes to historiography, it started with which sort of historian? That is called as imperial historiography. Imperial, right? That is even being called as colonial. And in fact, if we'll talk about the modern times, in that case, it is something which is called as Cambridge School of Historiography, right? Now, what is this historiography? I won't go into much detail of this historiography because I would like, of course, in future we are going to discuss somehow in detail. But this is the historiography which was given by which sort of people? Specifically, I'll say either Britishers or else I'll say Orientalist. So when the Britishers came to India, they had started writing the history of India, and they had their own objectives because of what they had been writing Indian history. And what was their objective? Since they wanted to rule over here, rule over India for a longer period of time, and that's why they felt the need to write Indian history, and they wanted to impose certain ideas. Look, knowledge is also something which can be imposed, which can be created. Knowledge is not something which is absolute. माइकल फूको जो है एक इम्पॉर्टेंट फिलोसोफर है, माइकल फूको कहते हैं कि नॉलेज और पावर का बड़ा इंटेंस कनेक्शन है. आप जिस दौर में रहते हैं उस दौर में आपको बेहतर समझ में आनी चाहिए. नॉलेज यूजुअली हम मानते हैं कि नॉलेज क्या है? कॉन्क्रीट है, ठीक है. इट कैन नॉट बी मैनिपुलेटेड, इट कैन नॉट बी चेंज, बट देन दिस इज नॉट ट्रू. इफ यू हैव पावर यू कैन क्रिएट द नॉलेज, राइट. आई होप यू आर गेटिंग माई पॉइंट कि व्हाई एम आई डिस्कसिंग अबाउट दिस, बिकॉज द मोमेंट यू हैव बीन टॉकिंग अबाउट बेसिकली दिस द मोमेंट यू हैव बीन टॉकिंग अबाउट बेसिकली दिस हिस्ट्री राइटिंग, सिंस दे हैड पावर विद देम, and that's the reason because of what they had created the knowledge of Indian history, and they believed, right, they believed कि they are going to create something something very authentic about India, and this was the knowledge which was imposed over us. And if you believe that this knowledge has been marginalized by us right now, we are not following at all, I must tell you that this is completely incorrect. We are still very much under the influence of this knowledge which was created by them. So that's why don't believe in this way that this is a knowledge which had been created two centuries before, and that's why it is not having greater sort of impact. वो हर चीज जो create कर रहे थे उसके पीछे एक intention काम करती थी, ठीक है. उसने समुद्रगुप्त को नेपोलियन कहा, है ना. ये तो सबने सुना होगा. समुद्रगुप्त वाज कॉल्ड एज द नेपोलियन ऑफ इंडिया, बट देन उसके पीछे जो माइंडसेट है, उसके पीछे जो आइडिया है, उसको समझने की कोशिश करिए. नेपोलियन एक वो कैरेक्टर है 19th सेंचुरी का बिगिनिंग का या फिर 18th सेंचुरी के एंड का, जिसको अल्टीमेटली इंग्लैंड ने क्या किया? हरा दिया, ठीक है. तो उन लोगों ने क्या नॉलेज क्रिएट करने की कोशिश की कि आप चाहे समुद्रगुप्त जैसे रूलर की भी बात कर ले, जो इंपीरियलिस्ट है, जो पूरी इंडिया जीतने का मादा रखता है, या द पर्सन हु हैड द करेज टू विन और कॉन्कर द होल इंडिया, that person can be also defeated by Britishers. So that's why they had been creating a knowledge, and this knowledge was created so much carefully that they could convey all those ideas. So of course it's a sort of very biased history written by them. And in fact, since it was something which had greater influence over the next school also, and that's the reason because of what still we are not able to come out of this, or maybe in coming not maybe, in fact in the coming few lectures there will be more clarity about these kind of things when I'll discuss about this. So this is the first school which is writing about it, and then it comes to the next thing, that's about the nationalist school. Now when it comes to this nationalist school, that was followed by which one? That was followed by the that followed the imperial school. So when I'm saying you that this is a sort of biased school of history writing, so the nationalist school it's very much true with the nationalist school also. The nationalist school was also very much biased because they were more willing to answer the questions which were created by the imperial school. So they had created certain questions, they had been asking certain questions, and in fact those questions were answered by the nationalist school. So this is the reason because of what I had been telling you, that actually what happened कि Indian history could never come out from the imperialist creation, and still we have been dealing with those kind of questions, and these questions are very important. Among the nationalist scholars there were some very important scholars, what I'll discuss in today's session only, but after some time. The nationalist people were followed by another important group, and in fact, you all must be knowing that Marxist group. आप सब ने एक स्कूल सुना होगा आजकल जिसके बारे में बहुत कुछ बातें चलती है, दैट इज कॉल्ड एज लेफ्ट। न्यूज़पेपर पढ़ते हैं या नहीं पढ़ते आप लोग? पढ़ते हैं ना न्यूज़पेपर। ये तो सुना होगा कि जो है पीपल आर टॉकिंग अबाउट द लेफ्ट एंड इन फैक्ट इट इज़ लाइक वेरी पॉपुलरली बीइंग सर्कुलेटेड दीज डेज कि लेफ्ट हैज़ डिस्टॉर्टेड इंडियन हिस्ट्री एंड वी नीड टू कम आउट ऑफ दिस डिस्टॉर्टेड हिस्ट्री। ये सुना है या मैंने पहली बार बोला? सुना है। कहाँ सुना है? न्यूज़पेपर में। न्यूज़पेपर में ऐसा कहते हैं ना, या फिर शॉर्ट्स में भी आपको मिल जाएंगे ऐसे शॉर्ट्स कि लेफ्ट वालों ने इंडियन हिस्ट्री ख़राब कर दी है, अभी उसको ठीक करने की ज़रूरत है। ठीक है, ये सब कुछ सुना है। सो मार्क्सिस्ट का जो है 1950s ऑनवर्ड्स बड़ा डोमिनेशन रहा इंडियन हिस्ट्री में, और ये लोग इतना डोमिनेट करते हैं कि दिस इज़ ट्रू दैट मोस्ट ऑफ द हिस्ट्री दैट यू हैव बीन रीडिंग इट्स अनफॉर्चुनेटली रिटन बाय द मार्क्सिस्ट पीपल. And if I'll take the name of few important books, I believe that most of you must be aware of, but then this is the logic because of what I have been giving you these informations, that you can understand the ancient Indian history with respect to the requirement that we do have in the current scenario. Marxist में आप R.S. शर्मा को आप सभी लोग जानते होंगे, whether you know R.S. शर्मा or not, सुना है नाम उनका। आप सतीश चंद्रा को जानते होंगे, आप बिपिन चंद्रा को जानते होंगे। ठीक है, आप जितने भी ज़्यादातर स्कॉलर्स जानते हैं इंडियन हिस्ट्री के लिए, अनफॉर्चुनेटली उसमें से ज़्यादातर कैसे हिस्टोरियंस हैं, वो मार्क्सिस्ट हिस्टोरियंस हैं। और ऐसा क्यों है? ऐसा इसलिए है क्योंकि 1950 से लेकर कम से कम 2000 या फिर बहुत प्रिसाइज होकर अगर हम कहें तो 1990s तक इन लोगों ने हिस्ट्री डोमिनेट किया। और मैं ये नहीं कहूँगा कि मार्क्सिस्ट गलत थे या सही थे, क्योंकि वो बाहर वालों का काम है कि वो सही थे या गलत थे, हमारा काम वो नहीं है। हमारा काम सिर्फ इतना समझना है कि whether this is the 100% accurate history that they have written, or they had certain flaws and we have to rectify these flaws. The Marxist people have actually written the history with a very different perspective, and in fact they have their own way of interpreting the things. Right, so they have interpreted everything with respect to what? They have interpreted everything with respect to basically their ideology that the economic factors are the most important factors which do play very important role. इसका फ़र्क क्या पड़ा पता है आपको? इससे पहले चाहे आप इंपीरियलिस्ट हिस्ट्री की बात करें या आप नेशनलिस्ट हिस्ट्री की बात करें, उनके साथ प्रॉब्लम क्या है कि उनके बायसेस कैसे थे? पर्सनल थे, या फिर अगर आप बहुत ब्रॉडर कॉन्टेक्स्ट में देखेंगे तो उनके बायसेस कैसे थे? नेशनल थे। When the Britishers or the Orientalists are writing history, so they had been writing it with which perspective? The British perspective, right? When the nationalist people are writing the history, with what perspective they had been writing? The Indian nationalist perspective. तो इनके जो biases थे ना वो दूसरे थे, इन थोड़े पर्सनल थे, थोड़े थोड़े नेशनल थे। लेकिन जब मार्क्सिस्ट लोगों ने हिस्ट्री लिखी तो उनके जो biases है वो ना तो पर्सनल है और ना ही नेशनलिस्टिक है। उनके biases कैसे थे? They had their biases that everything was seen by them, everything was gleaned by them with what perspective? That economic perspective. कि every change which is happening in the society, right? These are happening because of what? These are happening because of basically they are happening because of basically some economic reasons. That is the most important idea. It sounded bit logical, right? Because very easily we can say if the nationalist people are biased for India, the British people were biased for Britain. They had certain objectives because of what they had been creating such kind of history, but the Marxist people never had such kind of biases, and the way they have tried to give a sort of scientific look to history, and that's how they sounded bit logical, and that's the reason because of what they became very popular. उन्होंने ऐसे नहीं कहा कि यार ये फीलिंग या इमोशन से दुनिया नहीं चलती, एक इंपॉर्टेंट एस्पेक्ट है बट दुनिया नहीं चलती। उन लोगों ने कहा कि कुछ ना कुछ रीजंस हैं, कुछ फैक्टर्स हैं जिसकी वजह से ऐसा हुआ। सपोज मैंने जाके उधर अगर अटैक किया है तो मेरे पीछे मैं ये बोलूँगा कि जो है मेरे कुछ इमोशनल रीजंस थे जिसकी वजह से अटैक किया, वो लॉजिकल साउंड नहीं करेगा। लेकिन मैं अगर ये कहूँगा कि उस पार्ट में एक गोल्ड माइन है और जिसको ये लोग कैप्चर करना चाहते थे, जिसकी वजह से उन लोगों ने जाके अटैक किया, सो नाउ I think you all can figure it out which one is sounding logical. So Marxist people were basically they tried to understand everything with respect to this, and that's how they became popular. But yes, of course they had certain flaws, and in fact these flaws were the reasons because of what nowadays we have reached to a very different stage. And let me tell you very categorically that these are partially important for you, but then there are certain things which are more important, what I am going to discuss now. So the point is that when I'm saying it till 1990s, right? This kind of historiography dominated. So what after that? What happened in last 3 and 4 decades? That's the most important thing. So in last 3 and 4 decades, in fact, I must say that Indian history has gone through a sort of drastic change, which is very important for you to note down. Indian history has gone through a drastic change or the transformation. आपके लिए क्यों इंपॉर्टेंट है ये? एक बहुत छोटी सी बात से मैं आपको समझाने की कोशिश करूंगा, ठीक है? आपको क्या लगता है कि when I'm listing the name of some big professors, right? When I'm saying, let's say, R.S. Sharma, when I'm saying D.N. Jha, when I'm saying Srimali, when I'm saying like, let's say Ranveer Chakravarti, when I'm saying Satish Chandra, like I'm saying Irfan Habib, then Sireen Musbi, like for modern India, when I'm saying Bipin Chandra, then Sumit Sarkar and so on. Whenever I'll be taking the name of these kind of like, important historians, you must understand one point, that of course these were the bigger names in Indian history. So the moment it comes to UPSC, don't you think that UPSC must be influenced by these kind of people? Whenever the people are going to make the questions, right, for UPSC, whenever the people were going to evaluate your copies in UPSC, like of course they themselves were creating the questions and going for the evaluation, or else the people, those who had been going to the, like, going to do these kind of things, these kind of works, ultimately they were directly, indirectly influenced by this. So the moment it comes to like, the influence of these kind of people on UPSC, and that's the reason because of what the nature of questions used to be very different. And in fact, like, those books were very important because by reading those books, you could have answered those questions perfectly. And in fact, you could have incorporated the same content in your answer, what they had been looking for. That's the reason it was simple. But then as I am telling you that Indian history is going for a sort of, greater change, like 1990s onwards, that is important for us to be अंडरस्टूड. आपको लगता है कि ये सारे लोग अभी भी हैं बचे हुए और यही लोग जा रहे हैं क्वेश्चन पेपर फ्रेम करने के लिए? हाँ, जिंदा है, ठीक है, लेकिन जिंदा जब मैं किसी आदमी की बात कर रहा हूँ तो मैं आइडियोलॉजी की बात ज़्यादा कर रहा हूँ, ठीक है. आई एम नॉट टॉकिंग अबाउट बेसिकली दैट पर्सन इटसेल्फ. अब इकलौते बच गए हैं वो, ठीक है, ज़्यादा लोग बचे नहीं हैं. तो ठीक है, एक हाँ, रोमिला थापर इज ऑल्सो देयर, पर ठीक है, रोमिला थापर भी अपने आप को एक दूसरे स्कूल से मानती हैं, तो अभी हम ज़्यादा उसमें अंदर नहीं जाएंगे. बट ठीक है, आपको नहीं लगता कि पिछले 2-3 डेकेड्स में एक नए सेट ऑफ पीपल जो है वो लोग आ गए होंगे, जो क्वेश्चंस बना रहे हैं, जो क्वेश्चंस फ्रेम कर रहे हैं, जो आंसर इवैल्यूएट कर रहे हैं. और ज़रूरी नहीं कि अभी भी हिस्ट्री वही जो है 70 साल या 80 साल पुरानी हिस्ट्री चल रही है. तो हिस्ट्री हैज़ गॉन थ्रू ए सॉर्ट ऑफ ड्रास्टिक चेंज. And now what are the patterns which are there in the current scenario that you have to understand very carefully. Now when it comes to the current scenario, in that case I would like to write few names. So there is something which is called as subaltern history. I'll go for more details of these kind of things maybe in next lecture or next lecture, but right now I'm just giving you some idea that you can have this understanding how to understand this ancient India. अब ये subaltern historiography क्या है या subaltern history writing क्या है, that is a very important thing. I think how many of you have heard of subaltern historiography? कुछ लोगों ने सुना है, चलिए. So you have heard subaltern history. Now what is this subaltern history? Subaltern history is basically the history of marginalized, right? Simply. Now what is this marginalized? When it comes to marginalized, don't try to understand this particular segment, marginalized segment, with respect to the current scenario. Basically, while writing the history, what happened? Like there were so many sections of Indian society or any society, they were always kept marginalized, and the moment it comes to writing history of these kind of people, that's called as subaltern history. It started in 1987, like with Ranajit Guha, and then further it started taking the shape. So basically marginal जो subaltern historians हैं, इन लोगों ने क्या किया, इन लोगों ने कहा कि हम उनकी हिस्ट्री लिखेंगे जिनकी हिस्ट्री नहीं लिखी गई है, और इसमें बहुत सारे सेगमेंट्स आते हैं, ठीक है. और उन सेगमेंट्स का इम्पैक्ट या सबाल्टर्न हिस्ट्री का इम्पैक्ट, मतलब इट्स नॉट, आई कैन नॉट से कि इट इज डायरेक्टली रिलेटेड टू दैट, बट ऑफ कोर्स इट इज रिलेटेड लाइक विद द अदर सॉर्ट ऑफ हिस्ट्री, लाइक हिस्ट्री राइटिंग, एंड विल बी डिस्कसिंग अबाउट दैट. सो when it comes to the subaltern history writing, now as I am telling you that they have started focusing more on the marginalized, the history of marginalized segment. So that included women, right, that included peasant, that included labor, right, that included army, and so on. So basically they have started focusing more on which sort of like segment, these segment, right. But then it is not that easy to write a history of the marginalized section, because unfortunately the sources did not talk much about this. because the sources were mostly created for whom? For the elite sections of the society, and that's the reason because of what it's a bit tough for us to write the history of marginalized. But then since the older historiography has been like rejected, I won't say altogether, but to a larger extent they had been rejected, and in fact these kind of historians have started dominating, and this is the reason because of what now the nature of your question has started changing a lot. But I think it should not end here, right? It should be connected to some other schools which are very important. And among them, I can talk about a very important school that is called as the Revisionist School of History Writing. Now, how many of you have heard of this Revisionist School of History Writing? दो लोगों ने बस. You have never heard? 1990s onwards, there is another school which is becoming very popular. In fact, not another school, rather I will include one more school that is considered as post-modernist. So, subaltern, revisionist and post-modernist. Right? ये नाम आपने शायद नहीं सुने होंगे, बट इनका इन्फ्लुएंस कितना है मैं आपको बताऊंगा. ठीक है, ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है समझने के लिए. रिविजनिस्ट, फ्रॉम द नेम इटसेल्फ, लाइक you can getting some sense कि what is this revisionist historiography. Basically they have been trying to revisit the older concepts. What older concepts I'm talking about? I'm talking about the older concepts given by these people. And when you are revisiting those concepts, I'm very frankly, I'm telling you, it's not necessary that you are convinced with the same conclusion or the same idea what they have given. It's quite possible that when you are revisiting the same thing, that you can come up with a very different kind of conclusion. And in fact, this is what happening in Indian history right now for last 2.5 decades. So इसका मतलब है जब रिविजनिस्ट स्कॉलर्स की हम बात करेंगे तो आपको क्या लगता है कि बाकी पुराने हिस्टोरियंस खत्म हो जाएंगे? नहीं. As I'm telling you that while revisiting, like we are ultimately consulting or we are referring the same historians, those who have already studied that particular topic, and they have been they have given their own interpretation. Let's try to understand it with reference to a particular example. Let's say Aryan question. You all know that this is a very important question in Indian history, and in fact when it comes to the Aryan question, that has been tried to answer that so many historians, they have tried to answer this question. Like the most important question is about the original homeland of the Aryans. Isn't that true? कहाँ से आए थे ये आर्यन? एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट क्वेश्चन था. बीच का एक डेकेड रहा जहाँ पे इन मार्क्सिस्ट स्कॉलर्स ने ये प्रूव कर दिया कि आर्यंस अल्टीमेटली वर नॉट द इंडियन पीपल, दे हैव कम समवेयर फ्रॉम सेंट्रल एशिया और वेस्ट एशिया और व्हाटसोएवर इट इज. ठीक है, विल गो टू द डिबेट व्हाइल डूइंग द वैदिक पीरियड. बट हियर व्हाट हैपेंस नाउ, देयर वर सो मेनी स्कॉलर्स, दे हैव बीन ट्राइंग टू रिविजिट दिस पर्टिकुलर क्वेश्चन वंस अगेन, दैट वेदर दे वर लिटरली द आउटसाइडर्स और दे वर द इंडियन पीपल. सो दैट डिबेट हैज बीन taken a rebirth. It has come once again, and in fact these scholars are giving it very different interpretation. Now the new ideas are coming, the new logics are coming, and that's how they are revisiting. I'm just giving you one example, but then it is applicable to the most of the important topics of ancient India. Because when it comes to modern India, frankly I'm telling you that actually they are not having this much impact on modern India, how much impact they do have over what the ancient Indian history. Now after revisit, and there were so many scholars we can talk about Nayanjot Lahiri, we can talk about Gyan Pandey, then Ashish Nandi, then Partha Chatterjee, right, Gyanendra Pandey. There are several important historians, those who have been writing about with this revisionist perspective, and they are just trying to somehow bring out the new conclusion or the new interpretation of everything. That's called as revisionist historian. And in fact whatsoever names that I have been taken I have taken right now, in fact these are the prominent historians, the लिविंग लेजेंड्स जिसको आप कह सकते हैं, जो लोग अभी लिख रहे हैं और जिनका बड़ा इम्पैक्ट है अभी आज के टाइम पे हिस्ट्री लिखने में, हम उनकी बात कर रहे हैं. ठीक है, ऐसे ही सेगमेंट में हम एक और इम्पॉर्टेंट स्कूल है जो वेस्ट में तो बहुत पहले आ गया था बट इंडिया में धीरे धीरे करके ये एंटर कर रहा है, एंड दैट्स कॉल्ड एज पोस्ट मॉडर्निज्म. नाउ व्हाट इज दिस पोस्ट मॉडर्निज्म? हैव यू एवर हर्ड ऑफ दिस वर्ड आल्सो, पोस्ट मॉडर्निज्म? आपने सुना भी है कभी? नहीं सुना है। आपने मॉडर्न सुना है, ठीक है, और मैं मॉडर्न के आगे की भी बात कर रहा हूँ, पोस्ट मॉडर्निज्म। पोस्ट मॉडर्निज्म का जब हिस्ट्री राइटिंग की बात आती है तो इट इज़ नॉट हैविंग एनी कनेक्शन विथ व्हाट, इट इज़ नॉट हैविंग एनी कनेक्शन विद द टाइम। इट इज़ बेसिकली ए स्कूल ऑफ हिस्ट्री राइटिंग एंड दिस पर्टिकुलर स्कूल इज गिविंग ए वेरी डिफरेंट काइंड ऑफ इंटरप्रिटेशन ऑफ हिस्ट्री एंड दैट्स द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग। नाउ व्हाट इज दिस पोस्ट मॉडर्निज्म? पोस्ट मॉडर्निज्म इज बेसिकली टॉकिंग अबाउट द deconstruction. Now what is this deconstruction? Instead of reading the history in a very confined manner, why not to read a history which is very open, which is not always looking for what? A conclusion, which is rather giving you an idea and then it is leaving up to you completely to now interpret this as per your own way. That's called as postmodernist idea. And in fact, why did I say deconstruction? Because it's, as I told you, that it is not reading the history in a very confined way. Confined way कैसे होता है? गुप्ता पीरियड, है ना? और गुप्ता पीरियड में क्या पढ़ना है हमें? गुप्ता पीरियड की हमें पॉलिटी पढ़नी है, देन हमें क्या पढ़नी है? इकोनॉमी पढ़नी है, सोसाइटी पढ़नी है, रिलीजन पढ़ना, खत्म। ये कह रहे हैं ऐसे हिस्ट्री हम नहीं पढ़ सकते। हम क्या करेंगे? हम उसको डीकंस्ट्रक्ट करेंगे। डीकंस्ट्रक्ट मतलब उसके 50 डायमेंशंस हो सकते हैं और उन 50 डायमेंशंस के ऊपर हमें थोड़ी थोड़ी इन्फॉर्मेशन होनी चाहिए। और इनका काम क्या है कि दे आर जस्ट कन्वेइंग यू द लाइक यू नो सोर्सेज व्हाट दे डू हैव, लाइक यू नो वॉट एवर दे हैव फाउंड एंड इन फैक्ट दे आर लीविंग अप टू यू दैट हाउ डू यू इंटरप्रेट इट फर्दर। सो इट्स गिविंग ए सॉर्ट ऑफ लाइक, आपने ओपन बुक एग्जाम सुना है ना? ओपन बुक एग्जाम में क्या होता है? आपको क्वेश्चंस दे दिए जाते हैं और आपको किताब दे दी जाती है और कहते हैं कि आप लिखिए। वैसे ही आपको जो है कंटेंट प्रोवाइड कर दिया जाता है और कहते हैं कि आप सोचिए कि आप क्या कंक्लूजन आप इसमें से ड्रॉ करते हैं। सो आई थिंक ये थोड़ा आपको कंफ्यूजिंग लगेगा, पर ठीक है, पोस्ट मॉडर्निज्म एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट स्कूल है विच इज़ देयर। सो नाउ व्हेन यू ट्राई टू अंडरस्टैंड द हिस्ट्री in a present scenario, I think rather than the previous three, like you know, you should try to keep these three as the like you know, keep in mind these three which are very important, which are having the larger influence on the current history writing. So please remember few facts that the set of people, those who had been going earlier for the framing of questions and the evaluation, right now this set of people have changed and in fact like you know, now a different sort of like people have come and they have started framing the questions. And that's why if you really wish to understand it with respect to UPSC questions, in that case there is a simple suggestion I'll be providing to you that compare the questions which are being asked 20 years back and the questions which are being asked in the present times. आप देख लीजिए खुद से उठा के। मैं 20 साल भी इनफैक्ट मैं ज़्यादा कह रहा हूँ, मैं कह रहा हूँ कि आप सिर्फ पिछले 10 से 15 साल के क्वेश्चंस को कंपेयर करके देख लीजिए। 2010 से पहले जिस तरीके के क्वेश्चंस आ रहे थे और 2010 के बाद जिस तरीके से यूपीएससी ने लाइक खासकर इस सब्जेक्ट में इवॉल्व करना शुरू किया है, ठीक है। आप कई बार बच्चे ऐसे कन्फ्यूज़ होते हैं, वो कहते हैं कि ठीक है कास्ट से क्वेश्चन आया था या वर्ना से क्वेश्चन आया था, कब? 30 साल पहले। वर्ना से आज भी क्वेश्चन आ रहे हैं, बात सही है कि वर्ना से आज भी क्वेश्चन आ रहे हैं, बट क्या उस क्वेश्चन का सेंस वही है? क्या रिक्वायरमेंट नीड वही है जो 20 साल पहले वाले क्वेश्चन की थी, या नीड बदल गई है? ये समझना आपके लिए बहुत जरूरी है। ऑफ कोर्स द नीड ऑफ द क्वेश्चन हैज बीन ड्रास्टिकली चेंज। तो अगर आप सेम वही ओल्ड पर्सपेक्टिव फॉलो करते हैं तो रिजल्ट विल बी अनफॉर्चुनेटली डिसअपॉइंटिंग। वो डिसअपॉइंटिंग होगा क्योंकि आपके पास कंटेंट तो वही लिमिटेड है वर्ना सिस्टम को लेकर। The question is asking something very different, but then ultimately you have been like you know producing the same content for the question. And in fact, like you know, this is very important in UPSC that you need to keep in mind that you have to be very particular about the answer that you have been writing. Most of the people are just reading one like in a word or let's say terminology, and their answers are revolving around that. But you should not, like you are not supposed to do that. There is a particular dimension that has been asked in the question, and you need to categorically answer that particular dimension. If you have been giving a sort of like you know very tentative answer, very like you know rough answer of that particular question, you won't be like you know expecting a very good marks. आप हिस्ट्री लेते हैं, मार्क्स नहीं आता, फिर कहते हैं यार मार्क्स ही नहीं है। यार आप किताब वही पढ़ के जाओगे पुरानी वाली जो है, एंड आप एक्सपेक्ट करोगे कि मुझे मार्क्स नए वाले आ जाए, ठीक है। सो हाउ कम इट्स पॉसिबल? The question is altogether different. Just go and check out of the questions. In fact, I'll ask you to compare the questions of 20 years back and like you know, or 15 years back and the like you know present time questions. You will be able to understand the difference between these two, and it is all because of this changing historiography. और जब ये रिविजिटिंग में हम जाते, जैसे आजकल आप एक चीज सुनते होंगे कि राइट विंग हिस्टोरियंस बड़े एक्टिव हो गए, आप ये सब सुनते होंगे। कौन है ये राइट विंग हिस्टोरियंस? हु आर दिस राइट विंग हिस्टोरियंस? And why these people have become again very active? Have you heard of R.C. Majumdar? सुना है R.C. Majumdar को? R.C. Majumdar is a very old historian. Some were active in 19th century and then some part of 20th century. Now R.C. Majumdar is a very popular historian. And he was what sort of historian? He was nationalist historian. He is known as a nationalist historian. But then R.C. Majumdar has again become very active. So क्या R.C. Majumdar फिर से alive हो गए क्या? फिर से वापस आके किताबें लिखनी शुरू की? नहीं ना, तो बेचारे चले गए। और दुनिया का दस्तूर है कि एक बार जो लोग चले जाते हैं वो वापस तो नहीं आते हैं। सो व्हाई R.C. Majumdar is coming back once again? Because of these people. R.C. Majumdar was one of the most leading historians. In fact, पता नहीं यूरोपियन हिस्टोरियन है एक जिनका नाम आपने पता नहीं सुना, रैंके का नाम सुना है आप लोगों ने कभी? नहीं सुना? Ranke is one of the greatest I must say scholar in history, and in fact the history kind of history that we have been understanding these days, it is still under the the way I had been discussing about Michael Foucault, वैसे ही Ranke का contribution है और Ranke का influence इतना ज़्यादा है। R.C. Majumdar को हम आज भी जो है Ranke से जो है compare करते हैं, तो आप समझ लीजिए किस तरीके के historians हैं। But then unfortunately the moment it comes to the history books, nobody knew about R.C. Majumdar. तो R.C. Majumdar कब popular हुए? जब यूपीएससी ने बोर्ड में इंटरव्यू में क्वेश्चन पूछने शुरू किए कि R.C. मजुमदार के बारे में बताएं, तो लोग आके मुझसे पूछते हैं कि R.C. मजुमदार कौन है। ठीक है, अब पूछते हैं R.C. मजुमदार कौन है। या फिर आपने हेमचंद राय चौधरी, दैट्स अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट हिस्टोरियन, ओल्ड हिस्टोरियन अगेन, ठीक है। या फिर देयर वाज अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट हिस्टोरियन ऑफ मेडिवल पीरियड दैट्स कॉल्ड एज कालिनकर दत्ता, के दत्ता। दीज आर दोज हिस्टोरियंस, नाउ दे आर बीइंग रिवाइव्ड, एंड बीइंग रिवाइव्ड बाय हुम? दिस रिविजनिस्ट पीपल। वो लोग क्या करें, उनकी थ्योरीज को निकाल के रिविजिट कर रहे हैं और फिर एक नए तरीके की आर्ग्यूमेंट लेके आ रहे हैं। और आज के टाइम पे जिस तरीके की चीज़ें बड़ी एक्टिव हो गई हैं, वो ऐसी ही चीज़ें रिविजनिस्ट ज़्यादातर, क्योंकि एट द एंड अल्टीमेटली द टॉपिक्स आर डाइंग। सो ईदर विल बी गोइंग फॉर व्हाट, ईदर विल बी गोइंग फॉर द माइक्रो डायमेंशंस ऑफ हिस्ट्री और एल्स विल बी ट्राइंग टू रिविजिट। यही दो पॉसिबिलिटीज तो बचती हैं हमारे पास, और तो कोई पॉसिबिलिटीज बचती नहीं है। तो पुराने हिस्टोरियंस के आइडियाज़ को नए सोर्सेज के साथ मर्ज करके एक नई तरीके की हिस्ट्री क्रिएट की जा रही है। और आप कहते हैं कि हिस्ट्री जो है बदल रहा है, राइट विंग वाले आ गए, ऐसा कुछ नहीं यार। देयर वाज नथिंग एज सच राइट विंग और द लेफ्ट विंग, ठीक है। लेफ्ट विंग तो है, बट वो भी कहना कितना सही, मार्क्सिस्ट हिस्ट्री है, ठीक है। बीइंग ए लाइक इन अ स्टूडेंट ऑफ हिस्ट्री, वी शुड लाइक यूज बेसिकली द मार्क्सिस्ट हिस्ट्री एंड देन वी शुड यूज द रिविजनिस्ट हिस्ट्री, राइट। दीज आर मोर appropriate, and in fact the moment you say the right wing historians, who are these right wing historians? Ultimately they are coming from here only. In fact you can include this one also. So this is the change that is going through in the Indian history right now. So अगर चेंज ऐसा है तो आपने उस चेंज के हिसाब से क्या तैयारी की? अभी भी अगर आपसे पूछा जाए कि एंशिएंट इंडियन हिस्ट्री के लिए कौन सी किताब पढ़नी है, ज़्यादातर लोग आपको क्या सजेस्ट करते हैं, कौन सी किताब पढ़नी? उपिंदर सिंह। बट ऑनेस्टली यू जस्ट फिगर आउट वन थिंग, ऑनेस्टली जाके करना, आप पिछले 4-5 साल के क्वेश्चंस एंशिएंट के सामने रख लीजिए, ठीक है, और आप क्या करिए, आप उपिंदर सिंह की किताब लेके बैठ जाइए और आप आइडियली जो है या फिर ऑनेस्टली उसमें से आंसर ढूंढ के निकालिए कि वेदर यू आर कैपेबल इनफ टू राइट द आंसर ऑफ दैट क्वेश्चन विच वाज आस्क्ड बाय यूपीएससी। एंड आई कैन बेट ऑन दैट more than in more than 50% questions you'd feel incapable in writing those answers, because that book is not very relevant these days. लेकिन आप अभी भी चाहे टॉपर से या कोई भी निकल के एक ही किताब बोलते कि उपिंदर सिंह पढ़ लीजिए, आप लिख तो सकते हैं आंसर, बट वो बहुत परफेक्ट आंसर नहीं। जैसे लोग कहते हैं हिस्ट्री में 300 स्कोर नहीं हो रहा है, ठीक है, आप नहीं कर सकते हैं, आप 220, 230, 240 तक तो जा सकते हैं, लेकिन उसके ऊपर का स्कोर करने के लिए आपको थोड़ी बेहतर समझ चाहिए। I hope this idea is clear to you. So don't study history with the same old perspective. छोड़ दीजिए उसको। अगर आपको 300 के आसपास पहुंचना है तो फिर वो चीज़ तो काम नहीं करेगी, ठीक है। तो जब आप एंशिएंट इंडियन हिस्ट्री को रखते हैं तो ये जो आजकल के हिस्टोरियंस हैं, ठीक है, जैसे नयन जोत लाहिरी हो गई, ठीक है, उमा चक्रवर्ती हो गई, ठीक है, एबा कॉक है, ठीक है, ये सब कल्चरल हिस्ट्री लिख रही है, पारुल पांडेधर है, ठीक है, ये सब नए हिस्टोरियंस हैं जिन्होंने बहुत नए डायमेंशन से चीज़ें लिख के जो है, या मीनाक्षी जैन है, या मीनाक्षी there was another professor, I'm just missing the surname of her. So these are the new professors. They have given a new direction to Indian history, and in fact the questions are coming from these kind of books. क्योंकि अब ऐसे लोग जा रहे हैं यूपीएससी में पेपर बनाने के लिए, तो जाहिर सी बात है कि मेरा रिसर्च अगर जो है, मान लीजिए मैं अपनी बात कहूँ, मेरा रिसर्च डेमोग्राफिक हिस्ट्री पे है, ठीक है, और मान लीजिए आई गॉट द चांस टू गो टू यूपीएससी टू मेक द क्वेश्चंस, तो आपको नहीं लगता कि कहीं ना कहीं तो मैं अपना कर्तव्य दिखाऊंगा? हाँ या ना? ऑब्वियस सी बात है, मैं तो दिखाऊंगा। मेरा काम अगर डेमोग्राफिक हिस्ट्री पे तो मैं पूछूंगा कि 1920s में जो फेमाइन 1917 में जो है वो आया, उसके बारे में जो है आप लिखे। अब आप बोलेंगे यार पागल हो गए लोग, यूपीएससी पेपर बनाने वाले, ये कहाँ से आ गए, मैं कौन पढ़ रहा है इसके बारे में? पर आप पेपर उठा के देखो, ऐसे क्वेश्चंस आ रहे हैं आजकल। ऐसे क्वेश्चंस इसलिए आ रहे हैं क्योंकि जो लोग पोस्ट मॉडर्निस्ट हैं, जो लोग बहुत रीजनल स्टडी करते हैं, इनका इंपैक्ट आपको कहाँ दिखता है? बहुत जगह दिखता है। जेंडर हिस्ट्री हैज बिकम वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, ठीक है, कास्ट हिस्ट्री, दलित हिस्ट्री, राइट, यू कैन टॉक अबाउट वेरियस अदर काइंड ऑफ हिस्ट्री, ओरल हिस्ट्री हैज बिकम वेरी popular these days, ठीक है. So there are different kind of histories that have come, and in fact now I'm not, if I'm getting the chance to write a book, in that case I won't be writing modern India. ये तो तय है, मैं मॉडर्न इंडिया क्यों लिखूंगा? मॉडर्न इंडिया तो बहुत सारे लोग ऑलरेडी लिख के गए हैं। तो मैं क्या करूंगा, मैं मॉडर्न इंडिया के किसी एक खास डायमेंशंस पे किताब लिखूंगा। ऑफ कोर्स माय नॉलेज वुड बी मच मोर ग्रेटर एज कंपेयर टू अदर्स ऑन दैट पर्टिकुलर थिंग, एंड द मोमेंट आई गॉट द चांस टू मेक द क्वेश्चंस, लाइक यू नो, अनडाउटेडली आई विल बी मेकिंग ए क्वेश्चन ऑन दैट पर्टिकुलर डायमेंशन। इसका इंपैक्ट आपको दिखता है पेपर में। So that's the reason, because of what, like you know, understand the history with a slightly different perspective. खासकर ancient India, it's having greater impact even in medieval and modern. जब हम medieval और modern करेंगे तब हम उसकी बात करेंगे। There's one more dimension, ठीक है, that I need to discuss, and that's again very important. Now this is what the time, like you know, the time is another important aspect that we have to talk about. Why the time is very important? Let me tell you. The time is important for this reason that if you are having two different kind of history, at one place you have been reading the history of, let's say, 200 250 years, or let's say 400 years. At one place you have been reading the history of, let's say, 400 years, and on the other place, like you know, you have been reading the history of, let's say, you know, 10,000 years. Do you really believe that the approach should be same in while writing the history, like you know, both the periods? नहीं होगा। ये क्यों नहीं होगा, मैं आपको ऐसे बता रहा हूँ, ठीक है। लेट्स से मैं अगर आपकी लाइफ के बारे में पूछूं, आपका जो ग्रेजुएशन पीरियड है और आपका जो चाइल्डहुड डेज है, क्या दोनों में फ़र्क नहीं होगा? फ़र्क मतलब व्हेन यू आर राइटिंग, लेट्स से यू हैव बीन राइटिंग योर मेमोयर, आप किस पार्ट पे ज़्यादा फोकस करेंगे? कॉलेज वाले के बाद, या जब आपने ग्रेजुएशन किया, या फिर आप स्कूल वाले पे ज़्यादा फोकस करेंगे? कॉलेज वाले पे फोकस करेंगे। दैट इज़ द रीसेंट वन। यू रिमेंबर मोस्ट ऑफ द थिंग्स आर ईजियर फॉर यू टू राइट। कॉलेज में आप देंगे पहला दिन कॉलेज का कैसा था, ठीक है, पहला साल कैसा था, फर्स्ट सेमेस्टर कैसा था, और भी बाकी बहुत सारी चीज़ें। कुछ लोग मुस्कुरा रहे हैं, समझ रहे हैं, ठीक है ना? हाँ, ये वाला सर बता नहीं रहे हैं, वो भी लिखोगे यार, जाहिर सी बात है, वो भी लिखेंगे आप। लेकिन जब मैं आपसे अपने बोलूंगा कि आप अपने चाइल्डहुड डेज के बारे में लिखिए, ठीक है, तब आप क्या लिखेंगे? आप कुछ मेजर चीज़ों के बारे में लिखेंगे। जैसे मान लीजिए, मैं अक्सर एक एग्जाम्पल निकलता है, यही वाला मेरे दिमाग में बार बार आ जाता है, कि अगर आपका स्कूल एक जगह से चेंज होकर दूसरे जगह चला गया, आप पहले दून स्कूल में पढ़ रहे थे, दून स्कूल तो पता है ना, और दून स्कूल से निकाल के आपको गांव के सरकारी स्कूल में डाल दिया। सो डोंट यू थिंक दैट दिस इज गोइंग टू बी ए मेजर शिफ्ट इन योर लाइफ? दिस कैन ब्रिंग सम मेजर चेंजेस इन योर लाइफ? ऑफ कोर्स इट इज गोइंग टू डू। तो आप ये जरूर लिखोगे कि यार मेरा स्कूल चेंज कर दिया, पहले मैं बहुत सोफिस्टिकेटेड था, मैं पहले नाइफ और फोक से खाना खाता था, उसके बाद फिर क्या हुआ, हाथ से खाना खाना शुरू कर दिया, ठीक है। पहले मैं गालियां बड़ी सोफिस्टिकेटेड से देता था, अब जो है, समझदार है बाकी आप लोग। तो अगर कोई मेजर शिफ्ट है या मेजर चेंज है तो आप बताओगे, लेकिन ये नहीं लिखोगे आप स्कूल के टाइम पे कि मैं पहले दिन स्कूल गया, ठीक है, उसके साथ मेरे दोस्ती हो गई, ठीक है, वो दोस्ती ज़्यादा दिन तक चली नहीं, एक दिन उसने मुझे टॉफ़ी नहीं दिया, लड़ाई हो गई। यू वोंट बी राइटिंग अबाउट दिस काइंड ऑफ। Exactly the same is applicable here. When you have been reading the history of 10,000 years, and when you have been reading the history of, like, you know, 4,000 years, this is the older one, this is the newer one. In that case, the approach would be very similar here. So when you are writing this history, which is nothing but the ancient India, so basically your focus will be on what? Your focus will be some important events which are having that potential to change the direction of society. That is the most important thing. तो हमने क्या किया था, मैंने आपसे कहा कि हम क्या करते हैं, फॉर्मेटिव फेज है एंड वी फोकस ऑन सम बिगर इंस्टीट्यूशंस ऑफ दिस पार्ट. That's what you need to do. You have to just focus on those bigger, like bigger dimensions, the bigger aspects, where basically you are finding some of the greater, or because of what some greater changes are initiated in the society. तो जो अप्रोच आप मॉडर्न इंडिया में रखते हैं वो अप्रोच एंशिएंट इंडिया में नहीं चलेगी. मॉडर्न इंडिया के लिए आपको एक डिफरेंट अप्रोच चाहिए, और वहीं पे जब आप एंशिएंट इंडिया पढ़ते हैं तो एंशिएंट इंडिया के लिए एक डिफरेंट अप्रोच चाहिए. ये चीज़ आपको बहुत अच्छे से समझनी पड़ेगी. तो एंशिएंट पढ़ते समय आपका पूरा शिफ्ट जो है वो अलग तरीके से होना चाहिए, पूरा फोकस अलग तरीके का होना चाहिए, और जब आप मॉडर्न पढ़ते हैं तो पूरा फोकस अलग तरीके का होना चाहिए. ये कुछ चीज़ें जो है व्हाटसोएवर आई हैड बीन डिस्कसिंग जस्ट नाउ, लाइक दैट यू नीड टू कीप इन माइंड वेरी केयरफुली व्हेनेवर यू हैव बीन रीडिंग दिस एंशिएंट इंडिया. ये 3 चीज़ें मैंने कही. एक तो सिंस द टाइम पीरियड इज लाइक is a bigger time zone, is a bigger time frame, and that's the reason here you have to focus on some important like institutes, right? And the second thing, the formative phase of Indian society. So when I'm saying formative phase of Indian society, it means that majority of the institutions like took birth during this particular period, and in fact not only took birth during this particular period, then rather I can say what are the other things which are happening over here. You are also simultaneously see or notice the changes or the transformations which are happening here. So like the second thing that you have to understand, and then finally historiography. I have already had given a sort of good understanding how come that historiography has also gone through a transformation in last 2 and 3 decades, and in fact you need to cope up with that rather than like reading the same older books which are not relevant very much in the present times. तो आप ये अप्रोच फॉलो करें, आपको रिजल्ट मिलेगा. और जब ये सारी चीज़ें आप ध्यान में रखेंगे, when you are keeping all these things in your mind, in that case, if you look at the syllabus, your perception for the syllabus would drastically change, I'm telling you. So what we are supposed to do, let's see the syllabus. Now, when it comes to the syllabus, now this is the first part of your syllabus. Sources, and I would like to simply tell you here that which topics are very important, and if they are important, why they are important, and the next thing, like what are the dimensions that we should cover in the syllabus. You are not supposed to read everything which are given in the syllabus. अगर आप ऐसा कर रहे हैं, आप अपना टाइम वेस्ट कर रहे हैं. So जब sources की बात आती है ना, sources are undoubtedly very important, right? So if the sources, fine. So now it comes to sources. There are 2 different utilities of the sources. If you'll see the syllabus, if you'll see the PYQs, in that case you won't find the questions have been asked after 2018 or let's say 19, or maybe just 1 or 2 questions have been asked from the sources. So directly the questions are not being asked from this particular part. So should we skip this part, or still we have to keep in mind certain things? Actually sources are very important, but there are 2 significant utilities of the sources. और क्या utilities हैं इनकी? एक तो since there are certain questions are directly coming from the sources, that's one thing. And the second thing, while reading the ancient India, sources are important for all the topics, for all the topics, and that's why you should pay greater attention to the sources. Let me tell you how. Let's say there was a question that has been asked on land ownership in ancient India. Simple question है, और आप 3 तरीके के इसके जो है मेजर आर्ग्यूमेंट्स हैं. एंड व्हाट आर दीज मेजर आर्ग्यूमेंट्स? द प्राइवेट ओनरशिप, राइट? प्राइवेट ओनरशिप मतलब कि लोग ओन करते थे इसको, एक आइडिया. दूसरा आइडिया द किंग यूज्ड टू ओन द लैंड, एंड तीसरा आइडिया है कि कम्युनिटी यूज्ड टू ओन इट. देयर आर 3 आइडियाज. So let's say you have written all the 3 arguments. This is one way of writing it. And the second thing, you have been writing it with a different way. You are writing ki no, actually Kautilya's Arthashastra says that the king used to own all the land. which one is more more powerful statement? The Arthashastra writes that the king used to own all the land. The Gautam Dharma Sutra writes that no, actually it was under the community ownership. So sources are important in this way. आप एंशिएंट इंडिया को आप हमेशा थोड़ा सोर्सेज के पर्सपेक्टिव में समझने की कोशिश करें, क्योंकि मैंने आपको क्या कहा, पोस्ट मॉडर्निज्म। पोस्ट मॉडर्निज्म में मैंने क्या कहा आपसे, डीकंस्ट्रक्शन। आप कोई कंक्लूड तो नहीं कर रहे उसको, लेकिन आप बता रहे कि देखो भाई ये 3-4 किताबें हैं, वो अलग अलग तरीके की स्टेटमेंट दे रही है, आपने लिख के बता दिया। And that's the reason, because of what, in all the questions of history, conclusion is not that much relevant. जरूरी नहीं कि हर क्वेश्चन में कंक्लूजन हो, जो आपको जीएस में सिखाया जाता है या दूसरे ऑप्शनल पेपर में सिखाया जाता है कि यू हैव टू सजेस्ट सम वे फॉरवर्ड और यू हैव टू गिव सम वे फॉरवर्ड। इट्स नॉट नेसेसरी फॉर हिस्ट्री। You can simply write कि okay, these are the various arguments which were given by people. These are I'm giving you the right source also. If exactly here it was written, and that's how you need to follow. This is what you need to follow. That's it. Nothing else you have to do. So basically, sometimes you'll find directly questions from the sources, but then as I told you that the questions have become slightly less these days from the sources, but still the sources are very relevant with respect to this, and that's the reason you should cover it. So I think this topic can be covered in a very smaller time frame. Why? Because there are just 2-3 dimensions. But here, in future, because of this changing history, some new questions are becoming more important. New questions as in, have you ever seen that they have asked this question that how come the Vedas can be used as a source of history? They haven't asked this question. So of course the possibility of the new questions are coming. So we have to cover this as per the changing requirement of the subject rather than the same old pattern. So here you need to keep in mind this thing, otherwise it is quite okay. Okay, fine. Moving to the next topic, that's the prehistory and the proto-history, right? Prehistory, history and proto-history. Now this is again a topic which is very less relevant for you. And why it's very less relevant for you? Because questions are not being asked on regular basis. हाँ, एक regular intervals में questions आता है, तो आप थोड़ा anticipate कर सकते हैं इससे। Usually जो है आपको Neolithic से questions मिलेंगे और वो 5-6 साल के gaps में मिलते हैं आपसे। 2 topics हैं जो आपको एक regular intervals में मिलते हैं, Neolithic और Megalithic। जब 5-6 साल हो जाता है तो वो लोग question repeat करते हैं। तो यहाँ पे बहुत जद्दोजहद करके बहुत फ़ायदा नहीं है। इसमें कुछ इंपॉर्टेंट डायमेंशंस है जो कवर करिए और छोड़ दीजिए, इसमें से बहुत फ़र्क नहीं पड़ता है। और इसके पीछे रीजंस हैं। व्हेन आई विल कम टू द प्री हिस्ट्री एंड द प्रोटो हिस्ट्री, आई विल मेक यू अंडरस्टैंड लॉजिकली दैट व्हाट आर द रीजंस बिकॉज ऑफ व्हाट दे आर नॉट वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. सो आई थिंक टॉपिक वाइज टॉपिक विल अंडरस्टैंड दैट. राइट नाउ आई एम नॉट गेटिंग इनटू मच डिटेल्स, राइट? ओके, फाइन. Now moving to the next topic. Now this topic is very important for you. And why this topic is very important? Indus Valley Civilization. Because now the moment it comes to revisiting your history, I hope you can understand that this is a very important phase or the period of Indian history. बहुत सारी चीजें हैं. Why this Indus Valley Civilization is very important? Because the moment you talk about that national glory, right, that is one reason which is making it very important, right? The second thing, because these days the kind of history that we have been writing, we are just emphasizing more on one aspect, that India was sort of like a country or a sort of geographical territory, okay, or unit which was more or less self-sufficient and so many other things. Right. So that's the reason because of what Indus Valley Civilization has become very important. And one more reason, recently we have gone for much excavation, or let's say, directly speaking or directly saying, finding more sources of ancient Indian history, right? Specifically Indus Valley Civilization. आपने शायद सुना होगा कि राखी गढ़ी का excavation चल रहा है, ठीक है, धौलावीरा का चल रहा है, और बहुत सारी नई इन्फॉर्मेशन आ रही है. और इनका इम्पैक्ट कैसे है यूपीएससी में, मैं स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड आपको बता देता. धौलावीरा का जब एक्सकेवेशन जिस साल चल रहा था, उन लोगों ने एक क्वेश्चन पूछा था वाटर हार्वेस्टिंग पे, वाटर मैनेजमेंट पे, और उसी साल धौलावीरा के एक्सकेवेशन में ये सारी बातें निकली थी और उन लोगों ने क्वेश्चन पूछा. So that's the reason because of what I must say, since the new sources are coming, new evidences are coming, and that's how there are so many reinterpretations which are there. I don't know whether you know about this debate or not. Right now that debate about the relationship between the Harappans and the Aryans is very popular. और उन लोगों ने क्वेश्चन भी पूछा है. And there were so many other sources also, linguistic basis पे और भी बहुत सारे evidences हैं. ये आज के टाइम पे बहुत hot debate है. और जो लोग थोड़ा राइट विंग से हिस्ट्री लिखते हैं वो कहते हैं कि नहीं यार इनके बीच में रिलेशन था, ये लोग कंटेम्प्रेरी लोग हैं। ये लोग वो क्या लिख के गए, इंपीरियलिस्ट क्या लिख के चले गए थे, इंपीरियलिस्ट लिख के गए थे कि आर्यंस आया, हड़प्पन्स को हराया, ये सिविलाइजेशन खत्म हो गई, एक नई कल्चर शुरू हो गई, स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड सीधा लिख के गए। वो ऐसा क्यों लिख रहे हैं मैंने आपको अभी बताया। They have like an objective because of what they have been writing it, but their arguments are being revisited in the current times and some new interpretations are coming. And this is what I have been discussing. So that's the reason because of what undoubtedly this topic is very important for you in the current scenario, and you should be ready for this topic. And in fact, you can face numbers of new questions also. हालांकि बहुत कम डायमेंशन से जहाँ से क्वेश्चंस बन सकते हैं, बट मुझे लगता है कि अगर आप एक सिंपल किताब पढ़ें तो आपको बहुत कम डायमेंशंस मिलेंगे। लेकिन जब आप श्रीन रत्नागर को पढ़ते हैं, जब आप नयनजोत लाहिरी को पढ़ते हैं, तो ये लोग बहुत नए डायमेंशन से हड़प्पन सिविलाइजेशन को इन लोगों ने देखा है, और मुझे लगता है कि इसकी नॉलेज आपको होनी चाहिए। क्योंकि क्यों? Because these are the historians, those who are having the greatest influence on history writing in the present times, and that's why their ideas are coming in form of questions in the present UPSC paper. So undoubtedly this is a very important topic, and multiple dimensions, older as well as new dimensions, had to be also covered. Now megalithic cultures, of course the megalithic culture had become more popular in the recent times. मेगालिथिक कल्चर क्यों पॉपुलर है? क्योंकि इसको फॉर्मेटिव फेज कहा जाता है साउथ इंडियन हिस्ट्री का, दैट्स व्हाई इट इज इंपॉर्टेंट। बट अगेन वी आर लैकिंग सोर्सेस, and that's the reason because of what you won't find the regular questions. It does have the political dimension, economic, social, religious, cultural, वो सारे dimensions यहाँ पे भी है, but ठीक है, हम बहुत मशक्कत यहाँ पे करने का कोई फायदा नहीं, क्योंकि बहुत questions नहीं आते। तभी मैं कहता हूँ कि सिलेबस में आपको ये बहुत अच्छे से पता होना चाहिए कि क्यों कोई टॉपिक अभी इंपॉर्टेंट है, और अगर इंपॉर्टेंट है तो क्या रीजन्स है, और कौन से नए डायमेंशन है जो इंपॉर्टेंट है, ये समझना आपके लिए बहुत जरूरी है, और उस पर आपको ट्रैक रखना पड़ेगा। मेरे हिसाब से बहुत लेस इंपॉर्टेंट टॉपिक, ए बेसिक आइडिया कैन हेल्प यू। Now coming to this topic, ये तो कोई भी बता सकता है कि इंपॉर्टेंट है या नहीं है। क्या आदित्य, है या नहीं है? बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, बट इसकी इंपॉर्टेंस इसमें नहीं है सिर्फ, लेकिन इफ यू कंपेयर अगेन द क्वेश्चंस व्हिच वर बीइंग आस्क्ड अर्लियर with the questions being asked in the present times, you'll find a drastic difference in the nature of the question. Earlier we studied the Vedic period with respect to certain dimensions, early Vedic polity, later Vedic polity, right? Then early Vedic economy, later Vedic, and so on for culture and religion, so society, religion and culture. यही 4-5 dimensions हम पढ़ते थे, and mostly we had gone for what? Comparative analysis. But nowadays, there are different kind of history writing is going on for this particular period, Vedic period. और यहाँ पे मुझे लगता है कि अब जिस तरीके की हिस्ट्री चलती है, दे हैव आउटराइटली मार्जिनलाइज्ड द पॉलिटिकल एंड इकोनॉमिक हिस्ट्री, एंड दे हैव एम्फसाइज्ड मोर ऑन सोशल एंड कल्चरल हिस्ट्री. And this is the reason because of what you can find maximum questions are coming on socio-cultural aspect rather than on any other aspect. मार्क्सिस्ट थे, इकोनॉमी और पॉलिटी पे बहुत एम्फेसाइज करते थे, ठीक है। अब वो थोड़ा उनका इन्फ्लुएंस कम हुआ है, तो दूसरे डायमेंशंस पे लोग फोकस कर रहे हैं। तो बेसिकली दिस टॉपिक इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, एंड इन फैक्ट नॉट ओनली द ओल्डर डायमेंशंस, बट देयर आर सेवरल न्यूअर डायमेंशंस व्हिच आर इंपॉर्टेंट. अब यहाँ पे दिस इज योर रेस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी टू आइडेंटिफाई द न्यूअर डायमेंशंस कि व्हाट आर द न्यू पॉसिबिलिटीज ऑफ द क्वेश्चंस. ऑफ कोर्स न्यू पॉसिबिलिटी ऑफ क्वेश्चंस क्या होती है, जो नए रिसर्चेस हो रहे हैं पिछले 10-20 सालों में जो इस टॉपिक पे जो लिखी गई हैं, और एकदम नए डायमेंशन से वो चीज़ें लिख रहे हैं, आपको थोड़ा जानना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि क्वेश्चंस वैसे डायमेंशन से आ रहे हैं. आप जब वैदिक हड़प्पन रिलेशन की बात करते हैं, कैन यू फाइंड एनी इन्फॉर्मेशन इन उपेंद्र सिंह? नो, देयर इज नो इन्फॉर्मेशन, लिखती भी नहीं है कहीं पे वो. लेकिन अगर आप आज की किताबें पढ़ेंगे तो उसमें सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट कंसर्न यही है कि वैदिक हड़प्पन वेदर दे हैव शेयर्ड एनी रिलेशनशिप और नॉट. सो आई एम जस्ट ट्राइंग टू टेल यू और कन्वे यू दिस आइडिया दैट हाउ कम यू हैव टू कीप ए ट्रैक ओवर दीज काइंड ऑफ थिंग. सो ऑफ कोर्स इट इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, एंड लेट मी टेल यू दैट देयर वर सो मेनी इंपॉर्टेंट डायमेंशंस व्हिच आर देयर, एंड बट वी नीड टू फोकस मोर ऑन व्हिच डायमेंशन. One is society and the next one is culture, and in fact religion is also a very important thing, and the way we have started seeing the religion with a very different perspective these days, Now religion is not being seen like, you know, the same older perspective. Religion is also something which is the reflection of the other dimensions of society. That is incorrect. Like, you know, now there are different ways of looking into it. So that's the reason because of what these dimensions are important. And इसके भी अलग-अलग सब dimensions पे हमको focus करने की ज़रूरत है. So that's about this particular period. Okay. Moving to the next period. Now Mahajanpada period. Now Mahajanpada period used to be very important for the Marxist scholars. And this period was given greater importance by those. Why? Because they have seen the Mahajanpada period as a phase of transformation. उन लोगों ने बोला कि इस पीरियड में कुछ बड़े लार्जर ट्रांसफॉर्मेशंस हैं और उन ट्रांसफॉर्मेशंस में हम किसकी बात करते हैं, उसमें हम एक स्टेट फॉर्मेशन की बात करते हैं. दैट्स वन इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग. वी टू टॉक अबाउट द सेकेंड अर्बनाइजेशन एंड द थर्ड इज अबाउट द रिलीजियस रेवोल्यूशन. These are the three different aspects we are talking about. So basically they have focused more on the transformation, but in the recent times we have focused more on some other dimensions. And what is that? Now I'm just giving a reverse to it. Nowadays I think the most important topic for us here is Buddhism and Jainism. At the same time, what was the status of Hinduism? Or let's say, I think that's incorrect to say Hinduism, so it's better to write Brahmanism at that particular period of time. तो हमें इस पे ज़्यादा फोकस किस पे करना है, हिंदुइज्म पे या फिर ब्राह्मणिज्म पे. ठीक है, ये दो डायमेंशंस आज के टाइम पे बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. और ये जो अर्बनाइजेशन वाले क्वेश्चंस है अब पीछे रहे, अर्बनाइजेशन या स्टेट फॉर्मेशन, क्योंकि इट्स चेंजिंग द हिस्टोरी. सो महाजनपदा पीरियड पहले तो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट हुआ करते थे, आज के टाइम पे थोड़ा क्या है, कम इंपॉर्टेंट है. और जो डायमेंशंस इंपॉर्टेंट है वो ये डायमेंशंस है. बट यहाँ पे सिंस आई एम टेलिंग यू दैट दिस इज द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट वन, सो आई होप यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड कि यू कैन नॉट यू शुड नॉट स्टडी द बुद्धिज्म एंड जैनिज्म इन दिस वे कि अच्छा बुद्ध पैदा कब हुए थे, बुद्ध मरे कब, अष्टांगिका मार्ग क्या है और चतुर आर्य सत्यानी क्या है, बुद्धिज्म खत्म. नहीं, I think when I am saying you that it is important, and in fact again some recent works are there on Buddhism, you should understand Buddhism with multiple perspectives. What was its relation with the economy, the polity, society, right? Whether Buddhism was really a religious philosophy or a social philosophy, and there were so many dimensions are there to be covered in Buddhism and Jainism. तो हम भी थोड़ा अप्रोच अपना बदलना है. हम वो सेम पॉलिटी इकोनॉमी पे बहुत फोकस ना करके हमें बुद्धिज्म और जैनिज्म जैसी टॉपिक्स पे ज़्यादा फोकस करना है, क्योंकि आजकल क्वेश्चंस ज़्यादा इसे आ रहे हैं. आप यू कैन कंसल्ट द क्वेश्चंस ऑफ द प्रीवियस ईयर एंड देन विल बी एबल टू अंडरस्टैंड. सो हियर अगेन द टॉपिक रिमेन्स इंपॉर्टेंट, but the dimensions are very much changing with the previous one that you need to keep in mind. Okay, fine. Moving to the next one. Now Mauryan Empire. Mauryan Empire is again, it seems very important. Mauryan Empire. But Mauryan Empire में मुझे लगता है कि करने के लिए बहुत कम चीज़ें हैं जो हमें करना चाहिए. Mauryan Empire में अगर मैं कहूँ तो there are only couple of things which are important to us. ठीक है, this when it comes to Mauryan Empire, so I must talk about basically the sources which are very important, Arthashastra and then Kautilya's Indica, Megasthenes Indica. And then like for us the most important thing is Asoka and its relationship with Dhamma, Asoka and his relationship with the religion, or so many dimensions of Asoka's Dhamma basically. The second is about like basically the nature of the Mauryan state, and then the finally is the Mauryan decline. These are few dimensions. यहाँ पे मुझे नहीं लगता है कि in the recent history writing there are some new dimensions which are brought by them. हाँ, perspectives काफ़ी बदले. जैसे when it comes to Asoka's interpretation of Asoka's Dhamma, like I think a decade before there were so many different interpretations of this, but in the recent times there is a different interpretation of Asoka's Dhamma. पिछले 10-15 सालों में Asoka's Dhamma को देखने का अप्रोच काफ़ी बदला है. तो मुझे लगता है नए आइडियाज़ इनकॉर्पोरेट होने चाहिए, वो ज़्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है. यहाँ पे in terms of topic I don't believe that there is a sort of larger change that we find over here, right? Okay. Next is the post-Mauryan period, that is Indo-Greek, Sakas, Kusanas and Western Kshatrapas, right? Now this topic has literally become very important. This topic used to be important even earlier also and right now also. But then earlier, it was, or there was more focus on what? there was more focus on two dimensions, that's polity and economy. Earlier focus was more on polity and economy. Why? Because it marked the beginning of a new kind of polity. And why new polity? Because now some Western people are coming, the people from West Asia and Central Asia are coming, and these people have marked a beginning of decentralized rule. बट ये जो कंसेप्ट है, ये कंसेप्ट थोड़े पुराने हो इसलिए हो गए हैं. क्यों पुराने हो गए? क्योंकि पहले हमने जब मौर्यन एम्पायर को सेंट्रलाइज कहा तो हमने इसको डिसेंट्रलाइज कहा. जब हमने मौर्यन एम्पायर को ही डिसेंट्रलाइज माना तो फिर इसमें कुछ नया नहीं. द सेम थिंग इज देयर. आई होप यू गॉट माई पॉइंट. अगर आप मौर्यन एम्पायर को सेंट्रलाइज मानते हैं तो फिर ये एक नई चीज़ है. अगर आप मौर्यन एम्पायर को सेंट्रलाइज नहीं मानते तो फिर इसकी डिसेंट्रलाइज पॉलिटी जो है कुछ खास नहीं. देयर इज नथिंग न्यू इन दैट, एंड दैट्स द रीजन बिकॉज ऑफ व्हाट नाउ इट डज नॉट रिमेन वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. नाउ व्हेन इट कम्स टू इकोनॉमी, अनडाउटेडली इकोनॉमी वाज इंपॉर्टेंट इवन इन दैट पीरियड, एंड इकोनॉमी इज इंपॉर्टेंट इवन इन द करंट सिनेरियो ऑल्सो, बिकॉज इंडियाज इकोनॉमी इज गोइंग टू बी मोर ग्लोबल ड्यूरिंग दिस पीरियड. Global in terms of, like, of course it started having its relationship with China, then Central Asia, then West Asia, Europe and so on. So the way India's economy is becoming more and more global, and that's how economy is very important. But the dimension which has become more important these days is basically art and culture. They do have immense contribution in the growth and development of art and culture in India. बहुत सारे डेवलपमेंट्स है इंडिया के आर्ट एंड कल्चर में इस पीरियड में. और आर्ट एंड कल्चर का एस्पेक्ट, लेकिन आप देखिए कि पिछले कुछ सालों में कितने क्वेश्चन लोगों ने आर्ट एंड कल्चर से पूछा है. इसके दो रीज़न है, क्योंकि कुछ लोग प्रिसाइजली काम कर रहे हैं इस पीरियड में. आई जस्ट टुक द नेम ऑफ वन स्कॉलर, पारुल पांडे थे. She is working on basically this part, and in fact, like, she is one of the renowned historian presently. Like earlier she was there in DU, now she has gone to basically Ashoka University. तो ये जो है एक नए डायमेंशन है इन पे जिस पे काम शुरू हुआ, और ये सबसे ज़्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट बन गया है. और यही वजह है कि आप देखेंगे कि आजकल क्वेश्चन आर्ट एंड कल्चर से बहुत जो है हिस्ट्री में पूछ रहे हैं, क्योंकि एक नई हिस्ट्री है जिसको लोग निकाल के बाहर ला रहे हैं. सो दैट्स द रीजन बिकॉज ऑफ व्हाट आई बिलीव दैट दीज आर द थिंग्स व्हिच हैव बिकम मोर इंपॉर्टेंट. And here the societal change was also very important, but then you do not find great number of questions here. But like we should definitely focus on society, as the possibility of question is there from this particular dimension, right? So that's all about the post-modern period. Now moving to the next one is the history of South India. The history of South India has become too important, or let's say it is very important. And in fact, in coming time, it's going to become more important. I can tell you, I can bet on this, that it is going to become more important in coming few years. और नंबर ऑफ क्वेश्चंस बढ़ेंगे. पहले संगम एज पे लोग जो है कब क्वेश्चन पूछते थे, 3-4 साल के इंटरवल पे क्वेश्चन पूछते थे. धीरे धीरे संगम एज से नंबर्स बढ़ने वाले हैं. आप उसके लिए मेंटली रेडी रहिए. एंड इन फैक्ट देयर वर सो मेनी न्यू डायमेंशंस ऑफ साउथ इंडियन सोसाइटी वर बीइंग आस्क्ड. अर्लियर देयर वाज जस्ट वन क्वेश्चन बीइंग आस्क्ड फ्रॉम दिस पार्ट, और वो क्या था, हाउ कम संगम लिटरेचर वाज द बेस्ट सोर्स टू राइट द हिस्ट्री ऑफ साउथ इंडियन हिस्ट्री. दैट्स इट. Abhi, now they can ask the question on Sangam polity, the Sangam economy, the Sangam society and Sangam religion and so on, and that's where this is one dimension which is going to be very important, and there are so many dimensions here, like, which have become important here, so we have to be ready for that. Okay, moving next, that's the post, we have already. Now the Guptas, Vakatakas and Vardhan. That is another topic of ancient India. And in fact, if you'll see the previous questions, in that case, you won't find much questions being asked from this part. But now you just tell from your anticipation ki whether it is a relevant topic in the current times or not. Kyun? Gupta ka?
More emphasis on golden age.
आप तो अभी फिर वही पुराने वाले पे हैं. मैं आपको नई दुनिया दिखाने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ. आप बोलते नहीं, आप उसी में रहेंगे पुराने वाले में. गुप्ता पीरियड को लेके पहले कुछ प्री कंसीव नोशंस थे, और उन नोशंस में क्या है, एक नोशन ये था कि गोल्डन एज, ठीक है, एंड दैट वाज काउंटेड बाय द मार्क्सिस्ट स्कॉलर्स. वो उन्होंने कहा कि नहीं यार, गोल्डन एज तो नहीं था, कम से कम इकोनॉमी के पर्सपेक्टिव में नहीं था, ठीक है. इसको एक दूसरा सेंट्रलाइज्ड एम्पायर माना गया. अब हमने ये सारे डायमेंशंस हटा दिए, हम उस डिबेट में जा ही नहीं रहे, ठीक है। अभी हमारे पास क्या है, वी टॉक मोर अबाउट कंटिन्यूटी. यू रिमेंबर देयर वाज अ क्वेश्चन दैट हैज बीन आस्क्ड कि आई डू नॉट रिमेंबर द एग्जैक्ट स्टेटमेंट ऑफ द क्वेश्चन, बट आई रिमेंबर द क्रक्स ऑफ दैट. इट वाज आस्किंग अबाउट द कंटिन्यूटी फ्रॉम द पोस्ट मौर्यन पीरियड टू गुप्ता पीरियड. Earlier we had seen a shift, or we tried to see the shift from the post-modern period to the Gupta period. Now we have been asking for the continuity. So basically nowadays, like, what are the dimensions which are very important? First is about basically, I must say, ki the continuity rather than a shift or discontinuity. एक तो ये डायमेंशन है. दूसरा डायमेंशन जो आप सभी को समझना चाहिए, जो अभी हम पिछले टॉपिक पे बात कर रहे थे, देयर इज ए वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट डेवलपमेंट इन दिस पर्टिकुलर पीरियड इज विद रिस्पेक्ट टू आर्ट एंड कल्चर. और मैंने क्या कहा, अभी आर्ट एंड कल्चर पे काम बहुत ज़्यादा हो रहा है और आर्ट एंड कल्चर से क्वेश्चंस आप डेफिनेटली एक्सपेक्ट कर सकते हैं. तो ये तो है ही इंपॉर्टेंट डायमेंशन, ठीक है. और इसके अलावा एक चीज़ जिस पे बहुत फोकस नहीं किया था, ठीक है, अब करेंगे, ठीक है, एंड दैट इज अबाउट द formation of society. There are several important social institutions, they are getting settled here, and in fact it is not true that earlier the studies were not there. They were there, but then they have presented a very different kind of perspective on the study of this. Caste हमने कैसे समझा? Caste हमने अपने से ज़्यादा हमने foreign writing से ज़्यादा समझा. Have you heard of, like, there were so many important, like, scholars such as Susan Bailey is there. Then there was another important scholar, I'm just missing his name, the person who is writing about caste. So there were so many scholars, important scholars were there. They were Western scholars, they had studied caste, and we always understood caste and all these kind of institutions with their perspective. Nowadays the Indian authors have also started writing about the caste and all these institutions, caste, gender and other things, and that's why some new approaches had developed here. So that is again very important. So मुझे लगता है कि ये 2-3 डायमेंशंस हैं जो आज के पीरियड में बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. तो हमें जब इसके बारे में समझना है गुप्तास के, तो हम पुराने डायमेंशंस की जगह पुराने पर्सपेक्टिव्स के बजाय थोड़े नए पर्सपेक्टिव से समझने की जरूरत है, ठीक है. सो दैट्स द सिग्निफिकेंस ऑफ द गुप्ता पीरियड. ओके, let's move to this, like, this period. Now here, like, whatsoever topics are left, like, it's basically regional states during the Gupta era, then it is the themes in early Indian cultural history. Okay, sorry. These are some topics. So I would like to, like, deal with them simultaneously. So when it comes to this, frankly speaking, this is nothing but this was the most ignored part in Indian history. When you have been reading most of the books on ancient India, they haven't written a single, like, page on it. There was no history of early medieval history. Basically, Gupta, or let's say max to max Harsa, or to become more precise, like being more precise, I can say that Harsa was the last topic of ancient India. But nowadays the questions are coming from early medieval. Now why is the question coming from early medieval? Because these days there are so many works which are happening on early medieval. So first of all, the early medieval had come out from this perception of being, for a very long period of time, it is considered to be dark age. वो हटाया हमने. दूसरे फिर क्या किया लोगों ने, कहा कि ये कैसा फेज है, फ्यूडलिज्म का फेज है. That also has been rejected, and that's why now there are some new dimensions which have come. Now when you talk about early medieval, I must say that early medieval is again very important with respect to multiple developments, and that includes, like, the political development. There are several state formation here, isn't that true? बहुत सारे रीजनल किंगडम्स है जो फॉर्म हो रहे हैं यहाँ पे. बट ठीक है, पॉलिटी में मुझे अभी भी लगता है कि इतना पोटेंशियल नहीं है कि इसमें से बहुत सारे क्वेश्चंस आएंगे. बट देन अपार्ट फ्रॉम पॉलिटी, एंड इन फैक्ट फ्रैंकली स्पीकिंग, वी डू नॉट हैव मच टू डिस्कस अबाउट देयर economy also. So what are the dimensions that which are very important in this particular period? There was so much development in one thing that is called as society. इंडियन सोसाइटी मेजरली अगर एक शेप ले रही है, वो किस पीरियड में ले ली? अर्ली मेडिवल पीरियड में. सो फर्स्ट इज सोसाइटी, देन सेकेंड समबडी वाज सेइंग दैट इज अबाउट द कल्चरल एंड आर्ट. You know about temple architecture, right? So temple architecture has really evolved during this period, and that's why it's very important. मैं फिर से कहूँगा ये वो चीज़ है जिस पे आजकल बहुत काम हो रहा है टेम्पल आर्किटेक्चर में, और ये वजह है जिसकी वजह से यहाँ से क्वेश्चंस आप you be ready for the questions. In fact, the multiple dimensions question can be asked from the multiple dimensions, because when it comes to the temple architecture, you cannot see just one form of architecture, because there were so many varieties in temple architecture, and that's why it's very important. And when it comes to culture, right, so here again you have to understand it with the cultural dimensions, because specifically when it comes to South India, you know about the expansion of Hinduism, the expansion of Hinduism not only within India, even outside of India, and so on. In fact, this is the period when you can find the changes in the other things also, such as Bhakti movement is there at this particular stage. Okay. So either you talk about, let's say, religion, then literature, right, and then you see the temple in architecture, in painting also, changes were there. So बहुत सारे dimensions हैं, और मुझे लगता है कि पिछले 4-5 सालों में the number of questions have really suited up from this particular topic. So many questions are being asked. So at there was one point, no single question was coming from this, except those popular debates like feudalism debate and all. Nowadays they have started asking various questions from this. So that's how the early medieval period, this topic, and in fact the next one also, yeah, the themes in early, this cultural history, that has become very important. So when it comes to ancient India, please understand it with these perspectives, and that's how you deal with this ancient India. तो ऐसा नहीं है कि इसमें बहुत सारी चीज़ें पढ़नी, बट हाँ, हमें पढ़नी कौन सी चीज़ें हैं जो आज के टाइम पे रेलेवेंट है. वो सेम पुरानी चीज़ें पढ़ के हमें बहुत फ़ायदा नहीं होने वाला है. दैट्स द ओनली थिंग दैट यू हैव टू कीप इन माइंड, राइट? So that's all for today from my side. So in the next class, we're going to discuss about basically the first topic is sources. But before that, I would like to have a sort of brief discussion on the current historiography which are very popular. थोड़ी बहुत बात करेंगे, थोड़े हिस्टोरियंस के बारे में बात करेंगे, और फिर उसके बाद हम क्या करने वाले हैं, वी आर गोइंग टू इंटर इनटू द फर्स्ट टॉपिक, दैट्स द सोर्सेस, राइट? दैट्स हाउ वी आर गोइंग टू बिगिन विद दिस. So thank you all, thank you very much. So let's meet in the next class, right? Thank you all.